name is Gabriela. I'm UX designer from São Paulo, Brazil, one of the organizers of this year Talk UX, and a volunteer at Ladies.UX. I'm going to describe myself, actually my face, for accessibility. My skin is white, boyish eyes. My hair is a darker shade of blonde, straight and medium length. I'm wearing a white shirt with some black graphics and a purple jacket. In my background, there is a two small half moons hanging a purple wall. So the lecture that we are going to see now is Design in a Distributed World. How do UXers use design tools, systems, and process? This talk covers research and design tools and systems and shares strategies for conducting research on UX teams. The speaker now is from San Francisco, US, Clara Kliman-Silver, a UX researcher at Google, where she studied design tools and design systems. Previously, she led UX design and research at artificial intelligence and healthcare companies in the Bay Area and Boston. She also organized Ladies.UX San Francisco, mentors new chapters around the country, and founded Ladies.UX Boston. Clara holds a Bachelor of Science in Cognitive Science from Brown University. So now, Clara, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today.
Hi, I'm glad that you're here today with us.
So thank you so much for the introduction, Gabriela. I'll describe myself as well. So I have brown curly hair that's on top of my head right now. I have green eyes, and I am wearing green earrings and a black blazer. I don't know if you can see, I have a matching green necklace. And the wall behind me is white. So thank you so much for that introduction. You can see you're streaming my screen, right? Yeah. Okay. So I'm in San Francisco. It is 11 in the morning here. So, and I am really, really excited to be here. I think this is my fourth Talk UX. And the first one that I'm doing from home. So bear with me as I also figure out how to present remotely. So a little bit of logistical stuff. So I am on Twitter. You can see my Twitter handle there. First initial, last name is C. Kliman-Silver, Klimansilver. And I am a researcher at Google, as Gabby mentioned. I work in the material design team, and you can find us at material.io, material.io. So, as Gabby mentioned, my talk is called Designing in a Distributed World. But what does that mean? So I study designers and how they collaborate with other designers, as well as with developers and other roles that are part of the designer-developer product development process. And in particular, I look at design tools and the systems that are used to scaffold designs within products. So I'll be sharing a set of insights from some of the research that we've done, and also sharing some methods that we've used to understand how designers and developers work together, but how they can also be applied for you to understand the teams that you work with, whether you work on a product team or you work with a number of different people, or even you can use this for studying the groups that you build products for. So a little bit about me. So as Gabriela mentioned, my background is in cognitive science. I studied linguistics and visual perception in undergrad, and I worked as a lab assistant in a number of different laboratories. I was very interested in how people make decisions, how they see things, how they learn languages. And towards the end of my time in undergrad, I actually found out about UX, and I became interested immediately because I wanted to learn how to apply some of what I'd been studying in school to product development. And I was lucky enough to get a job at a company that built tools for doctors and other medical professionals to help them treat patients, prescribe medication, and so on. So other parts of the healthcare process. And that's really where I learned a lot of my UX skills early. I was living in Boston, Massachusetts at the time, and I became more involved with the local UX communities to learn not just what UX is like in healthcare, but also what it's like in other industries. And that's where I actually found out about Ladies.UX. So at the time, there was no Boston chapter, but I was connected to Lizzie and Georgie on Twitter, and they helped me set up a chapter in Boston. So that was a really interesting way to learn about UX in a number of different areas, and what UX is like at startups, at consultancies, and at larger companies. So I ran that group with a couple other people for a few years. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, I moved out to California, where I joined an artificial intelligence company and began working really in the tooling space. So I was a designer, creating tools to help developers build AI. And that was really interesting, another space that I didn't know a lot about, but I was really excited about creating opportunities to help people build new tools, to help them achieve tasks that they might not be able to do otherwise. And then in 2018, I joined Google as a researcher on the material design team, where I also was studying tools. And this was sort of an interesting look back at what I'd done in my career so far, because now I was studying designers and I was studying tools, and now I work as a researcher. So lots of interesting stuff. Really excited to share some of what we've been doing on material and tell you about the research. I don't know how many of you are familiar with material design or have used material design, but just wanted to tell you a little bit about that. And if you're curious, you can check us out on material.io. So material design is a design system that Google uses across many of its products, but is also available externally on material.io. And it consists of guidelines and components, icons, and we also create tools such as Gallery that you can use to work with your teams. So if you head to material.io, you might see something like this. This is an illustration of a component. And material components are interactive building blocks for creating a user interface. And many of them are available as open source code as well, so you can use them on a variety of platforms. And what this means in practice is that anytime you have an app bar or button or something else, you have a standard for how it looks, how it works. And for developers, if there's code available, then it means that they can implement it relatively quickly and consistently across your product. So it ensures that your users know what to expect and also can navigate your product or suite of products smoothly. Material describes itself as providing building blocks and great digital experiences to empower creators. So creators could be designers, they could be developers, but they're building new experiences, but they're working from building blocks of sort of a foundation of standard components they've created to be able to deliver these consistent experiences. So I want to go on and talk a little bit about what it means to adopt a design system. And this pulls from some fantastic research some of my teammates did around how we adopt design systems and the value that design systems bring. So we've talked a little bit so far about the language around a design system. So something like a component or types of components. You have buttons, you have app bars, maybe you have many kinds of buttons. So what are you calling all of them? And then what are the artifacts associated with them? So it could be that you have a website or you have code or you have a design file or something else where you list out all the different components and pieces of your design system. Then there's also tools. So how are you disseminating and actually working with the design system? And what's the culture around it? How do you share your design system? How do you make changes to it? How do you improve it? So these are all pieces of adoption. And we talk about this being a holistic process because it should involve the team's processes, their tools, and the needs of individual team members. So what does that mean for value? Why should anyone adopt a design system? Well, the research found that the value is also holistic. It can positively impact the process and the tools, or process and product, really. So I think that there are a couple of clear benefits. It means that anytime you talk about a button, all the designers and developers on the project know what that means. They know what the design specs are. They know what code to use. But it also establishes a consistent experience for the end users of your product. So every time they see an interaction pattern, they know what to expect. Every time they see a visual element, they know what to expect. But the research my teammates did also revealed a couple of other benefits that I thought were particularly interesting. So one of them was around team health, or how systems or tools relate to the way the teams work together. So one research participant actually said that after adopting a design system, their team spent less time churning and debating decisions around the design process, which actually made team interactions feel more pleasant. So you have the structure around you that actually helps facilitate better interactions. And additionally, with those improved processes and tools and that better structure, it actually led to increased job satisfaction. So people were happier working together, which is I think, a really interesting thing to find from a design system, and definitely speaks to how this process is holistic. The value is holistic as well. So I wanted to just set up that framework because a lot of what I'll talk about throughout the rest of this talk is around the holistic nature of how we work together and workflows. And thinking about systems and tools as pieces of a greater ecosystem that define how we work together, especially when we're all distributed. So let's talk about design tools. So why study design tools? I think, and why study them, especially in the context of design systems? So I see design tools as vectors for disseminating a design system and a type of scaffolding for building a product, if you will. So if we talk about the design system as the building blocks, and the tools are the structure around the system itself that allows you to build your product. And maybe more relevantly, they're also just a hot topic right now. If you go online, you'll see lots of people talking about which processes and tools are best, the features and benefits of different tools. So it's something that I think a lot of people are talking about, and definitely something that is interesting to study and understand what motivates people to choose one tool over another. So I'll be sharing some insights from recent research that we've done around tooling, particularly pertaining to how the use of tools can be part of that holistic process that encompasses your design systems and your workflows. So in a recent survey, we asked 582 UXers from around the world about the tools they use. So this was an interesting cross-section of the international UX community. It's posted on a number of different websites, and we heard from designers, researchers, people who do both design and development, writers, and a number of other UX roles around the world, representing different industries, representing different company sizes. Some people were freelancers, some people were at startups or agencies, some people were at larger companies. And because of the discourse around tooling, I expected that maybe we'd hear about a couple of tools, or most of the discussion would concentrate around a handful of tools that people were talking about at the time. But I was actually really surprised to hear that people told us about 144 different UX tools. Some of these were tools for designing interfaces or for creating prototypes. Some of them were for productivity tools, for creating presentations or documentation. There are all kinds of different tools for research, and a number of tools that were actually used in interesting ways. Maybe they had one initial intention, but they had been repurposed in new fashions. And I'm not going to talk about which tools specifically, because I think what's actually more interesting to talk about here is why people were using them and the impact that different kinds of tools can have on the workflow. So we asked people to list, I think, up to five tools, up to 3 tools that they use on a regular basis that were important parts of their workflows, which is where we got this 144 from. And as we did this, we actually asked them to talk about their primary motivators for selecting tools. So we asked them, what's the main reason that you use each of the tools you use? And interestingly, a large number of people said that they use their tools because their teammates use them. So while yes, preferences exist and people might pick a tool that they've used in the past, or a tool that they like, or a tool they've heard good things about, they're coming into a team or they're adopting a tool because this is the tool that their team is moving towards. And that makes sense. You want standards. It may be easier to work with the same tool as a group. But I think this is interesting because it definitely is different than sometimes what we're hearing out in the world, where there's a lot of discussion around which tool is best. So this is really a team that can be a team decision. Also, familiarity drives the decision to adopt tools. Some people, as I said, are using a tool because they used it at their last job or on their last team, or because they used it for a side project and they really liked it. So sometimes personal choice does play into it. This figure comes from the survey, but I've also seen this in other research we've done with definitely more of a slant towards the team adoption figure. So seeing more people using tools because their teammates are using it. I think that'll be something to keep an eye on. Other reasons that people might choose to use tools are because it's what's affordable. So some tools are free or cheap, and depending on the contexts that respondents were coming from, that might be more or less important. And then other might be niche use cases. You might have a very specific tool that you need to use because of a very specific use case that you have. And there may be additional factors that force you to choose one tool over another, like platform or other kinds of restrictions. So why this matters is that it's easy to talk about what tool is best, what tool makes most sense, but there are actually a number of factors that affect the choice of tools. And I think that there's often no one size fits all solution. This is very much determined by the context in which you work, and often the people or the roles that you work with. So something to keep in mind, especially as we think about the best choices for the UX teams that we work on. I also wanted to share a couple of quotes that I heard when talking about tooling and what drives, what people are looking for. So one survey respondent said, "I want an all-in-one solution so that I don't have to switch between too many tools, or so that I don't have to lose track of where information can be found." And I highlighted the first clause in here, the "so I don't have to switch between too many tools," because I think that that's really important. As you have more tools, then you have more things to juggle, more things to keep track of, and this can be really disruptive to workflows. It's a lot of cognitive load as you switch between contexts, and you might have to redo work in multiple places because if the tools aren't compatible with one another. But I think the second part is also really key here as well. I don't want to lose track of where information can be found. We hear a lot about the fracturing of sources of truth. This was something that repeatedly came up in the survey and has emerged in other research as well. Where is your latest design? Where's the latest feedback? And I'll talk about this more in a moment, but I think that as we have more tools, more contexts, and especially when people can't be together and easily communicate, then it's more likely that things will start to fracture. So thinking about how your tools can help you figure out where you should be looking, what's most important, is really critical here. The flip side of this, or sort of the flip side of this, is another quote that actually came from a different study that I ran, but I think is definitely a theme we heard in the survey and something that I'd like to call out. And that is that the least amount of tools that my teammate has to look at, the better. So what does that mean? What that means is that there's really two things going on here. So the designer who said this was talking about the least amount of tools, meaning that they don't want their teammates to have to look at ideally more than one tool or more than one place to understand what's going on. What it's not saying is that the designer who said this only wants to use one tool, but really that they should be able to point the people that they work with to one place. And if I could sum that up, I would say that common sentiment is integrations between tools are more important than the tools themselves. I think this is something I've heard time and time again throughout my research on tooling, that yes, the tools matter. Pick the tools that are right for your use cases, that are right for your team's use cases. Tools have different benefits and drawbacks, and there are a lot of good reasons to choose various tools. But the integrations, the pathways between them and how these tools work together is something that enables team collaboration and facilitation. So some people have said that they prefer tools that have plugins. And indeed, we've seen in the survey that plugins are on the rise, that the interconnectivity of tooling has become increasingly important for them when choosing new tools. And there are lots of things out there, whether they're plugins or extensions or just tools that naturally or have been engineered to work with other common tools. But really, the tool that works for you may not be the tool that works for your teammate, or may not be the tool that works for someone in a different role or stakeholder whom you have to collaborate with on a regular basis. So people are often choosing tools that allow everybody to stay in the contexts that are right for them without having to redo too much work. So an interesting observation I wanted to call out there. So the other reason that I think this is important is that we're seeing a rise of asynchronous work. And I should say that actually I ran the survey pre-pandemic. So all the data came from at a time when a lot of people were working in the same place, going into offices, though not everyone. And indeed, not everyone, because a majority of respondents to the survey said that they were working with at least one collaborator who was in another location, whether that was another location in the same time zone or another location in a different time zone. And you can imagine how this becomes complicated fairly quickly. If it's hard to jump on you might have to jump on a call to make a decision together or review design work, review implementations. But what happens when the person that you're working with is 9, 10, 12, 15 time zones away, and the calls that you would do happen when one of you is asleep? So we saw a rise in pre-pandemic in this kind of arrangement. And indeed, 50% of respondents reported using some kind of collaborative tool to create designs that would allow them to have a shared source of truth and be able to work together throughout the design process, whether that was for ideation or for actual designs or for specs for handoff. So the tools are responding to this need. And I haven't run the research again since the pandemic started, but it would be interesting to see what has changed, if anything, since then. We also heard people calling for better collaboration. One of the questions asked, what are workflow issues that are not addressed by current tooling? And some people said they wanted better tools to facilitate collaboration, either because their current tools didn't support it or because they did, but not in the ways they needed. So again, still a very big need that we're hearing about. So I think that what this really means is that the ability to collaborate in real time has become increasingly important as we select design tools and processes, and how well the tool facilitates that collaboration and integration. And really, at the bottom line is that the integration between the tools is more important than the tools themselves to make sure that you and your teammates can work together effectively in the ways that you need to. The other insight that I would call out here is that the workflows that we work with matter too. Understanding the tools that you use and why you use them is key here. And thinking about the workflows that frame the tools and the contexts, how they fit together, is something that I think a lot of it has been a theme in our research, and definitely something that a lot of people take into consideration as they pick the tools that they work with. So from there, I want to introduce this thing I call design ecosystems. So ecosystem, I think a lot of the discourse I've seen around design systems, around tools, can feel very fragmented. There's a lot of discussion of design systems, their pros and cons. There's a lot of discussion of design tools and their pros and cons, but how does this all fit together? And specifically, how do people who work with the design tools and systems and their own tools and systems, how do they fit into this equation? So this is like a very rudimentary sketch that I made a while back of a way to represent the different ways that different roles work together. So you have engineers, you have researchers, you have product managers and designers, and maybe UX writers and other people who are part of the process. And you have various tools that you're using to facilitate the process. You also have a design system potentially that's in the middle that is the building blocks of the product that you're creating. But thinking about everything from what's the role of your design system? How does it affect the way that you work together? How are you using it in your day-to-day? How are you communicating about it? Which tools are you using to facilitate that communication? And what about non-UX tasks? Or things that we don't think about as UX tasks? How do you make decisions? How do you share updates? How do you document changes? Where are your meetings happening? And what's happening in those meetings? These are all parts of the ecosystem and all things that are worth talking about when we think about how we work together. So again, thinking about the holistic picture and the impact of all of these different factors and how we collaborate. I've done some research on how design how design teams work together, and this also came out in the survey. The lack of collaboration or coordination functionality is consistently a pain point. So this again is about how do we make decisions and how do we work together effectively. And again, it may not just be around how do we design together, but how do we give feedback on the designs? How do you know what's most up to date? I asked people at one point, where's your latest design? And I heard all of these things. Sometimes these things from people on the same team. So design slide decks your design might live in a design tool, but it also might live in a deck that you created to tell the story of your product or give a report to a stakeholder. Decisions could be made in meetings, they could be made in chat. Has anyone ever been in a situation where you send out a design and then someone says, yes, this, but red, or yes, this, but this thing changed over here? How is that communicated? How is that stored? And how is that change made? What's the role of code, whether it's final code or an implementation? What about a prototype? Is a prototype more complete or more final than a static design file? All questions, there are no right or wrong answers here, but these are things that frequently come up in research around how do people think about the state of their work and what's most up to date. And I think this really speaks to issues of coordination and collaboration and opportunities to for teams to align on some of their processes here. I think that I called out a couple of tools and replace these with whatever tools you use in your own workflows. But for some of these coordination tasks and presentations, communication, what's happening in your design tools, sort of the tools that you explicitly think about for representing the state of your designs, and what's happening elsewhere. Is anything happening elsewhere, and does everyone know about it? How does communication change, especially when you can't be together? And even, are there micro tools that you're using? Could be plugins, could be extensions to communicate parts of your process. And how do you take all of that into consideration? So again, I think that one of the major findings from my research is really around the need for teams to understand how they're coordinating and collaborating just as much as they want to understand the tools that they're using and why they choose these tools and systems. So I want to leave you with a way that you can do this reflection on your own if you desire. So this started as a research method that we use to understand how design systems work together, design teams work together. But it actually turned out to be a really handy retro method as well. So we did roughly a 2-hour workshop with different teams, design teams, cross-functional teams. So they could be anywhere between probably 5 to 10 people, but I've seen it done with much larger groups as well. And we tried to have cross-functional representation, so designers, but also product managers, engineers, UX writers, UX researchers, other roles that might play an integral part in the process. And we asked teams to use this to think about their workflows end to end, or think about their ecosystems, build out a model for themselves. So we asked them to start by thinking about a typical or a recent project, and everyone to think about what is the first thing that you did, what was the last thing that you did, what did you do in between, whom were you working with, and which tools did you use to do the tasks. And next we had each individual workshop member draw their own workflow out. So this is just a way to get everybody in the right headspace, mindset, thinking, get them comfortable sketching and thinking about their own personal process. We then set them up to establish a team workflow, which was the next step, to really talk about what is your holistic process across the whole group. So after the individual workflow is established, we brought people typically over to a whiteboard. There are various ways to do this, and we had them build out a chart that looked like this. So for the entire team to think about, what are your phases end to end? What's the first thing that you do as a group? It could be some kind of kickoff meeting. It could be an ideation session. It could be someone comes in and says, this is what we're building this quarter. Let's do it. And then who's involved? Usually it's the people in the room, but there might be other roles as well. Maybe it's a partner team, maybe it's a client, maybe it's stakeholders, maybe it's a role that consults and comes in for a specific part of the process and then leaves. But really making sure that you've taken stock of everyone and everything who's part of this ecosystem and who really plays a role in the development of your product or your feature or whatever it is that you're doing. Then next you pull from your own workflow sheets and you say, what are the tasks? And I think this is again where it becomes important to move beyond talking about design systems and tools, but really the complete picture of everything that you're doing. So tasks could be anything from I write some kind of document describing what we're building. It could be something like I make a design or I make prototype, I prepare my designs for handoff to engineers, but what specifically does that entail? For a researcher, it could be writing a research plan, but it could also be getting sign off on that research plan or coordinating with designers to figure out what to test. One of the benefits of doing this as a group is that you then identify pieces of your workflow that you might otherwise have missed, especially for what I called out earlier, those sort of smaller tasks that fit in between, or what feels like smaller tasks that fit in between typical stages of a design or product development process that often may be where you see some of those pain around coordination and communication. So once you've gotten this figured out, then look at the tools that you use. So do you have one tool per task, or are there a single tool that is used to accomplish multiple tasks? Conversely, do you have multiple tools associated with the same task? And once you've got a picture of your tools, again, this is why it's good to do this as a group, because you can look at this together and sort of see what you might be missing. But once you have your tools, then we do the pain. And this is the really interesting part. So we gave people, in this case, a bunch of little stickers, and we had them put the stickers on the parts of their workflow where they felt the most pain. And this was an individual activity. Everybody got stickers they could put wherever they wanted. They could put them on the tools. They could put them on the tasks. Sometimes people put them on empty spaces. So maybe there should be a tool or a task here where there isn't actually a tool or a task. So we're not doing something, or we don't have a good way to accomplish this task. And that's the source of pain. And then we had people rank each pain point that they put down on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 was mildly annoying and 5 was extremely frustrating. And from there, we were able to get a sense of where is the pain concentrated and what are the major areas of opportunity. And this, again, is if you're doing it in a retro context, this can be very valuable. If you know that there are things about the way that your team works together that are not useful or frustrating, then this is a way that you can take stock of what's going on and basically say, where can we best invest in order to improve our workflows? So anyway, this is something that I think can be a really interesting way of getting a sense of how to improve workflows, but also it can be a really interesting research method if you're studying designers and developers, but also if you're studying a different group and you want to understand how they work together and what the opportunities are there. So the benefits of doing it this way, I think there's a multitude, but I think 4 I'd like to call out are, one is getting the balance of individual and team perspectives. So I've done a lot of surveys, I've done interviews of designers and developers, but I think one thing that was unique about this approach for me is that I was able to see what differed when you talk to a team versus when you talk to the individuals. And really, when you get the team perspective, it can be influenced by everybody who's in the room, but you also see how do things fit together when everyone's collaborating. So you get through this because you do the individual piece first, then you do the team group activity, you get that balance of individual and team perspectives. Second, it gives you a certain amount of granularity. So you're able to slice and dice the data in different ways. You can understand how what pain and opportunities are across different phases, tasks, roles, tools, and so on. Also, you get some insight into team dynamics. This is especially, I think this is useful both from a retro standpoint as well as from a research standpoint, understanding how the team itself collaborates, what's working and what isn't. And then if you repeat this over time, you can use it as a measurement technique. So initially understanding some of those primary pain points or opportunities, and then using this kind of as an experimental mechanism. So you say, we hypothesize that this pain point, this one right here, might be something we want to change. So we'll go ahead and change the tool or maybe the task or something like that. And then at some point later, maybe a quarter, maybe a year, you go back and do this again, and you can say, how did this help? How did this detract? Was our hypothesis right? And what do we want to change next time? So I think this can be something that's interesting to do over time, especially if you're using it in a retrospective context. So definitely recommend trying this yourself if you're interested. Participatory research methods are great for capturing a bunch of different perspectives. It also helps you understand different ways that your tools and your team work together and the tasks involved, systems involved, and thinking about that more holistically than just the individual role of the tools or the teams or the tasks. And then again, doing this with your team helps you identify some ways to improve your process, and you can do this over time. And I think that it's interesting to, again, for those of you who study various professions or who are creating tools to solve problems in various spaces, thinking about how you can apply this to your own work if you want to, and modifying the technique to understand how different roles work together in a variety of contexts. So lastly, I want to wrap up with a couple of final thoughts and ideas. So I think as we've learned over time, and I think especially right now, research has shown that collaboration tools have become more important in how we work together. I think that more and more designers and UXers are looking for ways to work together to clarify what they're trying to do and really reduce some of those pain points around communication and coordination. That said, I think that in a distributed world, especially let's not forget about communication and how, whether it's like communication specific tooling or tooling that has communication aspects, but really thinking about what are the processes that enable us to communicate about what we're doing and what kinds of tools help facilitate those processes. I encourage everyone to think about the roles of the tools and the systems that are part of their process, their workflows, and their ecosystems, not just thinking about the tools themselves, but rather the way that they work together. And lastly, treating ourselves as research participants. How are we as designers, researchers, developers, people who work together on building product experiences, how do we get things done? And auditing our own ecosystems to understand that and know how we can improve. So thank you so much for listening to me and for all of the questions on the live stream. I also want to give a shout out to my team and all the people who have contributed research to this and advised me on the report. And I encourage you to check out material and material.io. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Clara. Now we are going to start with the Q&A session. So we have a question from Yang Chen. What are the top 5 design tools from the research?
So not sure that I remember exactly which the top tools are, but I would definitely say that we're seeing an increase in tools that enable, and I guess I should say as well that the research is now conducted pre-pandemic, so things may have changed since then. But I think in general, thinking about how design tools enable collaboration, how design tools solve different problems, and thinking as well about the tools that do specific things as well as tools that do general things. In research, we've heard before about the importance of tools that solve general problem and might work for most use cases versus those tools that solve a larger problem, a specific problem for people who maybe are creating certain kinds of prototypes or people who are UX writers who want to be able to create strings and copy, and when each of those are appropriate.
And Teresa Lux here asked, what is your tip for those interested in studying cognition to design experience?
That's a really good question. So I think that one of the things that really surprised me in a great way about when I started working in UX is how much carries over from psychology and cognitive science, as well as computer science and art and many other disciplines. There are lots of great books there. I think a lot of the sort of go-to UX books, like Don't Make Me Think, definitely touch on this. I would just start reading about psychology. I think decision theory, visual perception was huge for me. I think one thing I think about I've been thinking about this since I was an undergrad, and I think about it all the time, are different ways that people parse visual information. There are lots of theories out there about how people see things. How do you recognize an object? How do you break down an image into different components? thinking about how do you recognize colors? What is the basis of color theory? So what I would say is think about what interests you about cognition. Are you interested in how people make decisions? Are you interested in how people see things? They pick out a design from a bunch of different, or an element across a design, and then start there. Find, I would definitely start with UX books and then see what they cite, and then start reading maybe some basic psychology or visual perception primers to learn more about how that works.
Nice. Now we have two questions from Vivian Vitire. The first one is if you can share your slide.
Unfortunately, I can't share my slides, but I think the talk will be up on YouTube. I think this is being pre-recorded.
And now the second question is, how can developers and front-end designers collaborate better on design system tips and tools?
That's a great question. So I think this is going to depend entirely on how you work, how your team works. I think that's the first place to start, is understand what is the best for your use case. But I would definitely say that developers and designers front-end designers have tremendous roles to play. Understanding what they think about the design system, how do they want to implement the components? Are they seeing things that maybe need to be componentized? Especially because as the people who are responsible for implementing the product and building the product, there may be parts of their own processes that feel very repetitive. So looking to them and their perspective, I think especially if you're creating tools that developers will use, make sure that developers have a voice in the process, because they're your users just as much as designers are in the design systems. So we do research on developers and how they use design systems just as much as we do research on designers. And I think that that's something that I definitely encourage everyone to think about if you're working on design systems.
Okay. Priscilla 10, hope I said it right, sorry about that. Besides surveys and direct interviews, are there any other participatory research methods? Why do you suggest interviewing individuals before the team and not vice versa?
Great question. So I think surveys, there are lots of different ways you can do this. I think surveys are one way, interviews are another, workshops like the one I described are another method. There's tons and tons of different participatory research methods out there. I would go around and think Nielsen Norman Group has a bunch of suggestions. Some of the typical UX books do. I can find some resources and share them on Twitter for different research methods if people are interested. But there's lots and lots of participatory methods out there that you can use to understand your users' experiences. I also recommend, it can be harder to do when we're all remote, but definitely immersion. So I did a study at one point when I just followed designers around for a day and asked them to show me what they're working on and how they make decisions. And I think that can be really valuable, especially if you're trying to understand those pieces of the workflow that may not be as obvious. Like, how do you make a decision? How do you share your work? How do you choose options? Why do you suggest interviewing individuals before the team? I don't necessarily. I think it depends on what you're doing. One of the advantages of interviewing individuals first or engaging on the individual level first, is that some people may be very comfortable sharing their opinions in front of a group. I think with anytime I've done participatory activities that have involved drawing, there are some people who are more confident drawing and some people who are less confident doing so. Or they may not be used to drawing pictures or making a journey map or something like that to express what they're thinking about. So doing other kinds of interviews or engagement, or having someone walk you through their workflow, can be another way to get at that. And doing that one-on-one may just be more comfortable. But there are definitely pros and cons. I think if you're going into and I'm going to avoid making blanket statements without knowing more about your work, because so much of this is dependent on how you work and what you're working on and what you already know. But I definitely think there are a lot of advantages in going broad first. to really understand a space, and then diving in and doing some of those more direct interviews, individual interviews or team interviews, once you know more about what someone's doing or what their problems are in a particular space that you might want to understand more.
So thank you so much, Clara. But we have to finish now.
Thanks so much. I hope that you all have a great day, and feel free to reach out on Twitter if you have more questions, and I'm happy to share certain resources.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone. And stay tuned that the next will be a panel. What's it like to be a UX professional in Brazil in Portuguese? It will be in an hour. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Clara, again.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.